Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is another presentation of Non-Linear Existentialism. The title of this work is Wittgenstein's Apparent Contradiction, and it's going to be an analysis of Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, and it's for ease of presentation, I'm just going to refer to this as TLP. So to begin is going to be the key messages of TLP. I'm going to be stating the contradiction I believe that exists in this work. The key messages of nonlinear existentialism as it relates to TLP, seeing if the contradiction still seems apparent, giving a possible solution of that, and ending into questions. Everything in red is going to be passages from TLP, the 2017 edition that was done by Benedict Classics of Oxford. The first one is that everything that we can know or experience is going to be from the world, and it's going to be either, he's not stating it here, but just for clarity of thought for later on, they can be either stated in a structured fashion, and that's going to be logical, or unstructured fashion, which is going to be illogical. And he kind of refers to this as the subjective or my understanding of it. Mine not being me as Andrew, but as me as a person. So if you've got an objective area of logic, that's going to be structured, and the not logical space the individual actually experiences or lives in the world as, that's going to be subjective. It's linear, so logic would have to be linear, and these passages, I believe, give evidence to that thought that he's expressing. Also delimits, as logic would require when you have rules or suppressing or dismissing uncertainty, that would have to also be structured so it delimits what can or cannot be within logic. It's also comparative, that what he does is that he comes up with a kind of an idealized metaphor that in logical space, logical picture and such, it's almost like a sphere. I'm not sure if that's what he meant. A sphere with little spot spaces within it, and how those spots, you put information and such within each one of these spots and you connect them together, and that gives meaning to the information within that. If it was just one spot within that logical sphere, logical space, that would not make any sense whatsoever. That has to have connection to or related to other spots, other logical dots, as it were, in that sky, and that only gives it structure, only gives it meaning. Very much like referential knowledge that I've used in the theories, the banner of non-linear existentialism. So there's much comparison, much agreement in this in point number 4 between NLE and TLP. It's also static. The variables that are used in the relationships and such notations in the propositions, elementary propositions and such, in the logical space are static, because if they changed, then the structure would break down and it could no longer be linear, and it would become unstructured and illogical. Number 6, again, just kind of gives more credence to what he was talking about for logic. Logic is a scaffolding, and I do like that metaphor where he gives structure to. Again, scaffolding is a very structured term, so that's why I kind of use the word structure to refer to logical, because it kind of implies that it's very solid. One thing has to lead to another thing, and it's delimited in that way. As opposed to that, we've got suggestions, whereas number 6 for logic, for structure, that one thing has to lead to another, deterministic. If you're on the other side of it, you've got suggestions where one thing can possibly lead to another. And he cites this one with the idea of the sun will rise tomorrow is no hypothesis. That means that we do not know whether it will rise or not. So when you're in the unstructured concept of reality, that we don't know if one will lead to another one. It's interesting, and he's getting onto it there. There's only actually logical necessity. There isn't, I guess, subjective necessity, which is an interesting viewpoint, and we'll talk about that later. For TLP, there's also, again, the idea of structure. Is it when the elementary, the atomic facts, the key parts of logic in structure space, that they will determine how things will move forward, because everything is kind of couched within those basic premises and such, and it has to lead to a certain outcome, again, logical. This again holds true that the way things are related to one another is a proof of that argument, that if you know everything about one piece of logical information and another one, that they will determine how they relate to each other. You might use signs and such to show that relationship, but signs and such don't have their own reality. They're kind of just using a shortcut to show how they relate to each other. Language. This is very interesting. Whereas if you're looking for structure, I would say that a proposition or a structured argument is a very good way of looking for logic. If you're looking in the unstructured realm, language is what he has used. And it kind of, the idea of probability, unstructured, of the individual. When he's talking about logic, he doesn't seem to be referring to logic of the person. Logic is probably, it seems to be something that transcends every individual. That logic is logic. It does not depend on the individual. Whereas in the unstructured realm, unstructured space, because language is unique to individuals, so it kind of reflects the individual, the person. So you would have logic being generalized, and whereas language is specific to the individual. Because of it being specified, there can be differences, unstructure, undelimitation, non-linearity with the individual. So it's quite very interesting. He uses language to kind of throughout his work to denote the subjective. And also he says it's certainly in his preference. Philosophy. This is where it gets a little bit more evident what he's thinking. So in philosophy, where metaphysical realm arguments, thoughts are within it, he kind of he doesn't really give much credence to it, because again, metaphysical is very much to the unstructured, so he doesn't dismiss it per se, but he doesn't give much purpose to it. And for philosophy, in his thoughts, 4.112, the object of philosophy is the logical clarification of thoughts. Philosophy is not a theory, but an activity. And through that, he just is saying that once philosophy appears to get into the uncertain realm, that it shouldn't be actually in it. And then kind of like anything that is uncertain doesn't have purpose, and it should be dismissed or reduced. And again, that's for non-linear existentialism, that's the exact opposite. So I do have concerns about what he was saying there. And for number 12, a person's perception is the world they are aware of. I am the world. So a person's individual specific viewpoint, sopialism, is the subjective, and one speaks of that. And there's going to be that connection between the unstructured of the individual as opposed to the structure of the logical world. And here we go. Thinking is logical. We cannot think anything unlogical, for otherwise we should have to think unlogically. And this is going to be kind of the key concern I have, which I will mention later on, for the contradiction I think that does exist, that thinking is logical, meaning thinking is structured, i.e. thinking is linear. Preface. The short of it all is that the book will, therefore, draw a limit to thinking, or rather not to thinking, but to the expression of thoughts. And so in this way, that when thinking is expressed in a non-linear way, where the limits are questioned, when limits are believed to be said to occur when they don't occur, or vice versa, then we get into the schism of one area being language. When language speaks of things that it cannot speak of, meaning the subject is speaking of the logic, then it shouldn't be speaking whatsoever. Whereas the logic just self-expresses. It doesn't need to have anything said about it, because if you knew all the premises and everything else they draw forth and such, that they don't need that expression. Whereas languages speak of things that it shouldn't speak thereof. So the apparent contradiction. If what is shown is logical, and what I'm saying about shown, again, that's going to be in that idealized logical space. What is shown is logical, and what is spoken, said, is not. And both are a result of thought, which is supposed to be logical. How is this possible? And I don't think it is possible. We'll go forward and just reaffirm that statement of mine. So from non-linear existentialism, we got two main references. We've got an external reference and we got an internal reference. The qualitative reference is the internal standard that a person has. That's going to be built upon the non-linearity of the FEM processing unit, the movement that is encased within the V1B layer, the cerebral cortex, and that's going to cause non-linearity, and that's going to be very, very important when it comes to the idea of the individual. And an individual in this case, in Wittgenstein's understanding, is going to be subjective. And then you have the quantitative, that's the external shared standard. The qualitative one is not apparently shared, but the quantitative one is shared. It's going to be what the society deems as a standard that they can use to communicate between each other, and that's going to be what's going to be stored within a person. If they don't have it stored within themselves in their cerebral patterns, then it's going to be not impossible for them to communicate with others. But also co-occurring at the same time is going to be the continual non-linearity. So we have both within an individual. We got the linear patterns, which are going to be set with the interaction of the outside to the inside, and you come up with the delimited patterns within the cerebral cortex that gives context to things. And on the other side, the qualitative, which is going to be the continual movement that's being created by layer V1B. So you got both of them co-occurring. So you've got the internal standard and a shared external standard, which is stored within the individual. And then we got the difference between differential perception and referential knowledge. Differential perception allows the individual their sensory organs to actually perceive the reality around them. If everything was the exact same color, exact same sound, if there was no differences between them, nothing could actually perceive, nothing could be teased apart. And then once you've got referential knowledge, which builds up within the individual to give context. And this, again, is very much like Wittgenstein's logical space, logical sphere, where you got the points within that logical sphere with the differentiated perceptual points, how they connect to each other, then you get referential knowledge. And then I just have the four different permutations of them, and you can just read through which one, whatever you have. And in this one, it's quite interesting. The quantity referential knowledge, we would have that as social symbols, and they're going to be stored within the individual. And then co-occurring at the same time, you have quality referential knowledge. This is to the individual, and it's going to be the uniqueness of the specified individual that what they believe is beauty and truth. So at the same time, I want to make the point clear that you can have both things co-occurring with the individual, and there's going to be a schism, there's going to be incongruency, because if the quantity and quality don't match up very well, if there's a big incongruency, that can cause a problem. So in the patterns of the individual, the ones that are secured within the individual, that are linearly set down within their own patterns, say one thing or mean one thing, and the qualitative referential knowledge within a person is slightly different, there can be a problem. But yet both are going to be co-occurring. One is going to be through the continual instability that's created by layer V1B and give me certain preferences that are going to be sent throughout the neuronal complex, neuronal cerebral cortex. and then through time, other ones are set because of the person's exposure to the environment, that there can be a difficulty between the two coexisting. So more key messages of nonlinear existentialism: thought, frequency, amplitude modulation, introduce incongruencies, interference, instability into the neuronal matrix. Number two, the incongruency, interference, instability is incremental and additive. So the idea with when it comes to information theory and such, that you don't want to have too much noise to the signal because it can actually degrade and overwhelm. So what happens with this is just the instability that's added through layer V1B is minor, but the thing is, over a period of time, it can become greater and greater and greater, and that can actually separate you from the environment, but it actually reintegrate you with the environment. And point number three is thought involved in writing and language will mostly have different levels of instability. That's of the individual. Again, written language is not what I mean by shown, or what, Wittgenstein means by show. Show is relational. Written language is a person's expression of reality. And the thing is that it can be subjective. So is there a contradiction? Yes, there is. Because what I believe thinking is, and he just says it's, Wittgenstein basically just states it as being as thinking has to be logical. It doesn't give any reason for it being that, other than saying that thinking creates something logical, but he also doesn't say if it can coexist with something that's not logical, because I believe, as I stated before, that they both can co-occur. So for him, that he directly implies that a linear process thinking can create two simultaneously contradictory outcomes. This work has to be contradictory. But as I said, that for nonlinear existentialism, that we agree that there's going to be structured and unstructured realities that the person is aware of. But the thing is that the brain can have both co-occurring. They can have the structure through things that are laid down, and having a shared standard, a quantitative standard, but also at the same time the non-linearity of the layer V1B can allow the person to be subjective. So the subject is going to be both through layer V1B, it's going to be the non-linear element, but also, of course, it's going to have the structure where things are laying down through how the person learns and interacts with the environment. So you have both co-occurring. But also at the same time, you can have the incremental additive nature that allows a person to actually change their restructuring what they've learned from the environment. So if the environment is laying down what does words mean, what do these symbols mean within the cerebral cortex through exposure, the person themselves can take that and restructure to what they need themselves. And so you kind of solidify it, and it gets restructured, gets solidified, it gets restructured. It's a very dynamic, living process. So I think what happened with Wittgenstein is that he had two things that were that he was aware of: the structured and unstructured realities that we live in. But the thing is, he somehow made structured, logical, separate from the person, but that doesn't make whatsoever. It's almost very much like with Plato and Socrates, when they had the forms that somehow existed beyond the individual. But for Wittgenstein's work, he was just saying that with the language and logic, he said that logic is with us and we're aware of it and it affects us. But the thing is that we can't speak of it because we speak of it, we somehow taint it, even though we've created it from our interaction with the reality. Somewhat confusing. So possible solution: thinking is not linear and therefore not inherently logical, but some of the outcomes it produces or are associated with can be. So we can produce logic. We can extract from logic isn't separate from us. That how things relate to one another, I guess he refers to as logic, but the thing through interactions with what's around us. The more and more we interact with it, the more we can actually understand it. So the thing is that we don't create that reality, but giving structure to it, which is logic, which I believe is logic. So, and therefore we create logic as it relates to us, because everything is related to the observer. It is not that a grouping of the object is inherently logical and others are not. It is a type of thought that is applied due to the perception of the thinker. Again, the idea is that reality is around us and we interact with that, and through giving it structure, logical structure, referential knowledge, that we kind of relate one thing to another. And through the process of seeing that relationships, we're the ones who we impose it based on our point of view. Everything is based on the perception. The vantage point is relative to the thinker, like because we're transforming the external energies into the internal environment. It's relative to us. And the more and more we see it, the more we can probably see the item as it truly is. But it's always going to be from our vantage point. We can get further and further distance from it. That's true through our technology and such. We have tools that kind of objectify things more and more, but in the final analysis of seeing how it relates to ourselves, it's going to be always from our point of view. So basically, if you want to see more of this work for Non-Linear Existentialism, you've got YouTube, you've got the main page, which is Charities of Life, and also I've just recently updated the overview of Non-Linear Existentialism of Separation and Integration. It's version 3, just updated days ago. It's a 220 version of it, and I've got a link below that. But again, it's really got to state that I do admire Wittgenstein's work. However, it does bother me in systems that are logical, which are under the heading of philosophy, because philosophy is the idea of thought in general terms, that sometimes they denigrate philosophy. And in Wittgenstein's work, as I quoted one of the passages, that he only wanted to deal with certainty in philosophy, and I think that's completely incorrect to do so, because as I've stated in Separation and Integration, metaphysics deals with basically with the idea of the uncertainty that we generate, who we are. The uncertainty allows for incongruency, allows for instability and restructuring of cortical passages within our brains, that allows us to develop to go to better understand the environment around us. Without that uncertainty that I believe metaphysics speaks directly to, that we wouldn't exist. If we were completely linear with the environment that I've argued in Separation and Integration, we would not exist. If we were completely linear to it, we would be just to be apart from it. We couldn't separate, couldn't have sentience, couldn't develop ourselves. That development, of course, has led to a lot of destruction in our reality, but also at the same time has helped us to understand our place within the environment, within reality, and better integrated within it. So I don't believe that we are linear. And of course, if you believe with a linear delimited model, that's for you to say. But the thing is that subjectiveness is not that we have to first be subjective before we can be linear, and not the other way around. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.